Hey guys, I'm in the beautiful city of San Francisco, California. I always love coming here. There's always lots of really interesting game developers for me to come and talk with every time I do come down here. And I'm here to preview a specific game, which I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about right now, but I had some extra time and I thought I'm going to use that extra time to go visit my pals over at Digital Eclipse. They've got some cool stuff coming up. Let's go check them out. Mike, where are we right now?
We're actually at the Digital Eclipse office, our incognito office in the East Bay, and we're in my office. I think my wife, she's happiest when I'm here because all my junk comes here, as you can see around me. Junk to other people, like treasures to me.
What is it about this space that fuels you?
Probably the easiest way to describe it. It's everything that I enjoyed when I was a kid. It's all the nostalgia I have. I surround myself with it. It's like a nostalgia blanket.
You've been with Digital Eclipse for how long now?
I've been with Digital Eclipse probably, since 97. So I've been making games with Digital Eclipse since 97. I remember you coming by the studio back in the Game Boy days.
I'm with Mike Mika. He is the creative director of Digital Eclipse, and these are the guys that make every single Game Boy game you've ever played, right?
Well, almost every single Game Boy game we've ever made.
Been around long enough that like you and I actually didn't have any gray hair, and we could like walk around and actually we could probably run and jog with no effort.
Not anymore. Yeah. Digital Eclipse, I think you could describe almost as, something that is from your childhood at this point, right?
Yeah.
And that seems like that's the company philosophy in a way.
Yeah, it's funny to me because a lot of people grew up playing Digital Eclipse games, and I just can't picture myself as somebody who's been around that long because I feel like a kid every day. Digital Eclipse, everybody that works here, we love video games. We grew up with video games. We're the first generation where video games were pretty much always there. And like the first game I ever played was Pong. And so it's like I've been around since the beginning till now. So we have just this deep appreciation, and the way that we express it is through the products that we do here at Digital Eclipse.
What has been the focus for the company over the last several years? I know that Atari is in the mix now, but there's been a lot of changes with Digital Eclipse.
Yeah.
And a lot more focus on sort of this museum quality curation that's been going on for you guys.
One thing you'll notice when you come into Digital Eclipse is almost every station where somebody works, there's a lot of history there. Everybody here is involved in some way with game preservation, and that's been something we've wanted to do for so long, since the old days. In fact, like those early collections that we're known for game collections, and the earliest game collections we did for like Midway and everybody else, there used to be these kind of bonus materials where we do interviews. We thought those were the most fascinating aspects of those things, but it's really hard to get our partners like Midway and others to agree to let us do more and more of that stuff. So our dream for years and years has been, why don't we make that the focus, and the games just support the story and the history and all the collected materials and all the things that we could get in interviews with people. The game should be support materials along with that. And so our first real project to pull that off, actually the first one was Atari 50. Before that we were working on Kareteka, and then Atari 50 came through our door, and we're like, now we can actually do this like big and go strong with it. And that was the first game in a relationship with Atari, for instance, where we met with Wade Rosen. He came out to the studio, he was sitting right where I'm sitting, and we pitched him the idea of we want to do this museum first celebration of Atari and give the whole thing. And we're so used to people just saying like, I don't get it, or that sounds expensive. Wade was like, yes, let's do it. This sounds great. And so that was the beginning of the whole relationship between us and Atari, and it also was the beginning of Digital Eclipse metamorphosis to its ultimate form that we've been pursuing for so many years. We've been thinking about the Gold Master series for quite a while. The name and all that came together pretty fast, but the concept's been around for a long time. Even recently, someone was tweeting at me old interviews I had done where they're like, you're mentioning basically Gold Master from like 5 years ago. You call them minis. That's what that was. But we've been thinking about it for so long, with the idea being we want to focus on very important moments or games or genres that provided an impact to the game industry, but a lot of people don't understand how or why. And so we want to shine the spotlight on those kinds of projects so that people don't forget or quickly forget. It's like old movies, for instance. A lot of people don't realize that The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and that sort of how important those movies are until you are presented with something in a way that you can understand its context and its impact on history. So we want to do the same kind of thing for games.
I'm wondering if you had any connection or contact with the Criterion Collection folks, and was there a mutual admiration, or
anything that has come based on the work that's been going on recently with the studio?
From our perspective, it's a one-way admiration because we haven't really talked to the Criterion Collection. I've been a consumer of Criterion since way back when I had a Laserdisc player back in the 90s. They were like a high watermark for us, like the amount of seriousness and maturity they bring to the kind of reissues that they do. That was day one, something that was very important for us to compare ourselves to and strive for on the game side.
The first of the Gold Master series was Kareteka, and working with Jordan Mechner. I have never encountered a game developer that has done such an amazing job collecting their work and preserving all of that. Is it tough for you to work with other developers because they don't have that level of resource for you guys to dive into?
We were so spoiled working with Jordan because Jordan did, as you said, he had everything. He had journal entries. He had probably even receipts from the restaurants he ate at, for all I know. It's like there was such an amount of history collected that he kept and preserved for so long, and he had iterations of his games. So we see work in progress versions of Kareteka that we could share with people, and you could see the creative process. I don't know if we'll ever find that again. So the work since then for Gold Master Series has been a lot. There's been a lot more work for these. When we worked on the Minter Collection, for instance, it took a while, but Jeff spent a lot of time finding things. The irony of the whole thing is even his original master copies of games, he didn't even have. And so it was just trying to find people and collectors who had those and gather those up. Yeah, it is a lot more challenging. Now, our most recent announcement with the Tetris, it's actually a little bit easier because Tetris is focused on Tetris, and they do maintain their history. They have a version of the original machine that the game was developed on in their lobby and these sorts of things. So that was actually a lot easier to work with. I mean, they've been doing things like movies and other things too, so they've been collecting a lot of their historical documents.
So we just had this Apple TV movie, this Apple TV Plus movie, and it was very fun. How accurate was the film to the real story of how Tetris was made?
The dramatized version of the story. Obviously, there's stuff in that movie that did not actually happen in real life. Pretty sure that there was no car chase, for example. But the thing is, I think that the movie accurately sort of portrayed the emotional truth of what was going on. Like, you know, Hank Rogers of Bulletproof Software, when he went to Moscow on a tourist visa to try to find the ministry in the Soviet Union, the organization that could get him the rights to Tetris, he was doing that on a tourist visa. The way the Soviet Union worked at that point was that he was not allowed to go snooping around and to conduct business at all. And so he was taking a big risk, especially by just sort of walking in the front door, you know, of this governmental organization. They could have talked to him and sat him down in a meeting and worked out some rights with him, or they could have thrown him in jail. And the Tetris story could have been how Hank Rogers spent 40 years in a Soviet prison. He really took some risks. And Alexey Pajitnov, I mean, he also took risks because he wasn't supposed to be talking with Hank either. And the friendship that formed between those two guys really is the core of the amazing story of Tetris that we're telling. And by the way, many of the stories of Tetris end when Tetris comes out. Tetris is released, and then that's the end of the story. We go beyond that. We get into, well, what happened between Hank and Alexey after Tetris came out? What happens after the events of that film? I do actually feel that the film captures the real drama of the moment and the risks that these guys were taking, and it makes you feel that very real tension that they would have felt, but it's just very difficult to like show that on a movie screen. But what we want to do with Tetris Forever is try to illustrate factually like what exactly was going on. And quite frankly, for me, the absolute true story, the things that really took place behind the scenes, they're stranger than fiction. And some of the weirdest stuff that happens, in the movie really did happen in real life.
Hank and Alexey have built this partnership, this friendship that's, 40 years? Mm-hmm. What was that like to experience that firsthand?
We knew we wanted to do this because Hank and Alexey are like the original odd couple. I mean, these guys are just night and day. Alexey is a sort of introverted mathematician who created these puzzles, to amuse himself. He shies away from the spotlight. He knows he has to because he created like the greatest video game of all time. People always want to ask him about it, and he still works with the Tetris, company today. And that's a real testament also to the power of friendship between Hank and Alexey. I really think if Hank Rogers was not there looking out for Alexey over the last 40 years, Alexey would never have made a dime off of Tetris. Some big video game publisher would have bought the rights to Tetris out from under Alexey, but because Tetris is still a family business, I mean, it's still Hank, it's Alexey, we had to get them together. So we talked to Hank about everything leading up to the moment when he first met Alexey, and then we talked to Alexey about everything leading up to the moment when he first met Hank. And then we're like, okay, then we sat them down together and we said, okay, this guy walks in the room, what happens? And the two of them, again, as I was saying, like Alexey, introverted mathematician, game designer. Hank, also a game designer, also from a game design background. And that's why he was able to make that connection. Everybody around Alexey was a business person, was either a Soviet official or a business person just looking to get a piece of the money. In walks Hank Rogers, video game designer. That's how their friendship kind of formed very quickly. Meanwhile, Hank, though, is Mr. Extrovert, business guy, wheeling and dealing. The two of them together are just fascinating to watch the two of them because they've got this tight, literally just 40-year friendship together. Whenever they're in the same city, they're always having dinner together. They're always hanging out. They're always talking about the future of Tetris. Maya is second generation Tetris, right? I mean, she grew up with just Tetris all around her all the time. And so for her, this is her life. This is her family. This is something that she really wants to protect and carry forward. Again, like they're very proud, justifiably so, that essentially them in partnership with Alexey, that the guy who designed the game still controls the game's fate. That's simply not the case for most creative works in the video game industry at this point. And for Maya, you can absolutely see she could work anywhere. She could have worked anywhere, but she, of all of Hank's kids, like she was the one who was like, I want to work with my dad and I want to keep the family business going, keep it in the family.
How many different variations of Tetris are we getting in the game or in this collection? Mm-hmm. And what's the best one?
We've said over 15. We have not yet announced the full game list. It is still actually something that we're working on. We want it to be as robust as we can because obviously when you're talking about Tetris, people are like, well, isn't it just one game? Then it's like, no, there's this wide variety of different Tetris games with different takes on the rules and things like that. But there's many different versions, yes, of standard Tetris. What is going to surprise a lot of people if you did not grow up in Japan is the fact that a lot of the games that we're able to include are the games that Bulletproof Software, which then became Blue Planet Software, which is now just called Tetris Incorporated, the games that they created, they only had, in most cases, they only had the rights to distribute those games inside Japan. I would really like people to take a look at these games that were released in Japan because they're excellent. Tetris 2 plus Bombless on the Famicom. You look at that and you're like, this is a big selling Tetris game on the Famicom or NES in Japan. It was created in partnership with Chunsoft. So the guy Nakamura, the guy who directed the Dragon Quest games, directed Tetris 2 plus Bombless. Koichi Sugiyama, who did the Dragon Quest music, did the music for Tetris 2 plus Bombless. The guy who eventually went on to be one of the game designers of Earthbound worked on this game. And so basically, like, this version of this game was designed by a group of big name game developers in Japan. And they were like, oh, we really want to make like the ultimate Famicom Tetris. And they did, and it's excellent. It has wonderful music. The controls are fantastic, and just not a lot of people have played it. So I mean, I'm excited for people to be able to look at that. And then of course, the cult favorite, Tetris Battle Gaiden. It's a multiplayer game. It's like a lot of different puzzle games where if you're playing a single player game, you're going up against a computer opponent. And it's like you're always just fighting a computer opponent, but everybody draws from the same shared pool of pieces. So there's a strategy element to trying to get the piece that your opponent doesn't get, keep the good pieces from them. It's a character-based thing, like, like Super Puzzle Fighter or something like that, where you pick a character and then each character has different special moves. And so you're constantly thinking, what character should I pick? What special moves do I want to use? You're thinking about who was my opponent picking? What moves are better for that opponent? And it's really, again, it's got a great core Tetris gameplay, but then it's super fun. And again, like a lot of people, it's never been officially released in the US. Most of these games, the Japanese ones have never been officially released outside of Japan prior to now. If you look at the title of this project, it's Tetris Forever, right? It's not a look back on old Tetris games, It's not like let's look back at these games that sort of came out a long time ago. It's literally about, this game is just simply timeless. Like, Tetris is going to outlive all of us. It is equivalent to something like, chess, you know what I mean? Or the Japanese game of Go. It is something really unique and special in the video game world, and it's bigger now than it's ever been.
You must be getting a ton of feedback from game makers everywhere around the world that are appreciating this work, but also maybe rethinking their own preservation and their own way to celebrate the efforts that they're putting into their projects. Is that starting to happen a little bit for you?
Oh yeah. I think one of the best reactions we've had is from other developers who are now thinking about, oh wait, I should probably do these sorts of things to preserve what I'm doing. They're more interested in keeping materials that they have. I've had people mention to me that they were gonna toss out like versions of their games until they've played Gold Masters. That sort of stuff is fantastic. I love hearing that because 15 years from now, if we're going to cover that game, like we want those materials. But it also, I hope that as people use these, they start to get kind of reprogrammed to understand the importance of these materials and what to keep and learn from these, that this is something that's important and it's not a throwaway thing.
Do you miss the movie game opportunities?
I do. I miss making movie games because there's a limitation it has. Usually there's a deadline that's almost impossible. You get to live in a world and expand a world even in many cases that you might be really fond of. Like I remember we're working on a Lilo and Stitch game for Game Boy Advance and we were creating new characters for the game, and to see those characters be realized as animated characters in the television series was crazy. It was just really nuts. And so living in those worlds is really fun. And so we kind of have gone back to that now, and we're working on a Power Rangers game right now that kind of feeds that nostalgia we have for making those kinds of games.
So Dan, where are we right now?
We are deep underground in the secret bunker that is the Digital Eclipse Development Studio in Emeryville, California. And you are here on a day when we're doing a full playthrough of our game, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Rita's Rewind. We all do different things and we all sort of take care of our own disciplines, but there's a lot of value in playing the game together on a weekly basis, going through, seeing what's working, seeing what's not working, seeing what we need to add, subtract, multiply, or divide. Honestly, it's whatever the game needs. It playing through it will immediately help identify issues that can be better.
Is this a safe space, or do feelings get hurt sometimes?
Oh, my feelings get hurt all the time. No, yeah, I mean, everybody is here for the same reason. Sure, everybody's proud of their work, but we don't have ego clashes here. Everybody understands that the goal is to make the best possible game we can make for the fans that are looking forward to something like this. We all come in with our own ideas, and then we do whatever Mike Mika tells us to do. That is Mike's intuition on what makes a good game and what makes something fun is actually kind of our North Star. So we all have similar understandings of how we want the games to play. But yeah, the feedback flows freely here, let's say.
Love it. Set up the story for the game and how this all came together and where it fits within the timeline of the Power Rangers.
Sure. Ours is totally a what if. Ours is an alternate timeline story. Last year was the 30th anniversary of the Power Rangers. Netflix did a great special called Once and Always that brought some of the original actors back and crossed over from different series. But through that, they introduced a new villain, Robo Rita, who is a pure evil version, cyborg version of the original Rita Repulsa from the original series. She has time travel technology in that show, so we said, what if we do the classic license game thing of we're going to tell our own story, but inspired by what you know? So we said, what if Robo Rita went back in time, through a time portal, teamed up with her earlier self, knowing the 30 years of mistakes that she had made, and says, we're going to get them once and for all now. So we're going back to an alternate timeline of the original 93 Power Rangers, the original 5, and we're telling that story, but they don't know that they are playing against two Ritas, and one of them knows all the mistakes. So she's pulling in different things from different timelines of the show as well. It really gave us all the excuse we needed to make a really fun arcade-style brawler with cameos from characters that you might not expect and deep cuts for the fans that care, but also the core of it is it's a really fun beat 'em up.
And there's a lot more than it just being a beat 'em up though, right? There's all kinds of other levels, and you guys went pretty big with this whole concept.
Yeah, I mean, we realized when we had the opportunity to do this, you think about the classic X-Men arcade game, you think about the classic Turtles and Simpsons games. The Power Rangers were the biggest thing in the world in the 1990s, and somehow they never got an arcade game. So we are taking that opportunity to make that at long last, and why restrict ourselves to one 90s genre? So our goal was to make a 90s style game for a 90s franchise. I'd say about 70% of the game is a classic brawler style, but then we have the other 30% being super scale or 3D things, similar to like Space Harrier or Outrun. So we've got some bikes and you're chasing enemies through the city. I don't want to reveal who they are. You're going to be in the individual dinosaurs for the fans that really have always wanted, I want to be in the Mastodon. You will be in the Mastodon, chasing characters, blasting all the stuff in the environment. And at the end, when you finally catch up to this giant-sized enemy, you've never, as a player, really been able able to do anything from the cockpit of the Megazord. So we are going to be able to have you in a first-person perspective from the cockpit doing a first-person kaiju slugfest for the first time. So that's, yeah, we're playing with some pseudo 3D elements. The spine is definitely this brawler gameplay for 5 players, so we've been focusing a lot on that.
There's got to be a story, like almost another game on the negotiations to make all of this happen. Was it difficult? How did it all come together?
It's actually been surprisingly easy. We had heard that Hasbro wanted to create this new line of games called the Hasbro Retro Arcade. Given our experience with, classic gaming and classic gaming properties, we had just rolled off of the Cowabunga collection, the Turtles collection that we did. So they said, well, if you could do anything you wanted to do with any of our IPs, pitch us, let us know what you'd want. And we're like, well, what if we did the ultimate 90s game they never had, but also mixed in these other genres? And they said, show us. And so every step of the way, they've been very happy and permissive. Yeah, do more, keep going. No, we love the creative direction. We've been given an unusual amount of creative freedom by Hasbro to do right by the franchise because they know that we can do right by the gameplay. So it actually has been pretty frictionless. We keep saying like, well, here's some more stuff for feedback, and we're waiting for the inevitable like, well, we need you to change. They're like, no, that looks great, keep going. So I feel like we're on the right track, and it's been a lot of fun working with them because they're like, you guys are clearly big fans, you know what you're doing, keep going, keep going.
One of the best games of the last few years was Shredder's Revenge from Tribute, and it really seemed to creak open a door. Do you credit the Tribute guys and that coming back and the response to Cowabunga Collection? It was just the right moment?
I think we're in the middle of a brawler renaissance, and I do think that Shredder's Revenge is a big part of that. I mean, we can't forget Streets of Rage 4 at the same time. There's a new Double Dragon title out. So Rita's Rewind has kind of the perfect moment for people to rediscover this gameplay, and it's enhanced gameplay. The beauty of being able to do something like this is we can do that 90s brawler that never existed, but we can do it better than it ever would have. Like I have very fond memories of a lot of games from the 90s, but sometimes I go back, I drop a quarter in, and I go, there's 3 frames of animation. I have 2 moves. And that was the game, and I was happy with it, and I'm still happy with it. But for a modern gamer that had bigger expectations, I should have, 5 to 6 moves. How come these sprites aren't smoother? Yeah. So, yeah, we get the opportunity to do that. Shredder's Revenge certainly showed how, you could take an older genre and infuse it with new aspects and new life. We're honored to be part of this moment in time, and they definitely did open the door. Hopefully we'll give people more reasons to keep walking through that door.
When's it coming out, Dan?
It's coming out in 2024. We're really close to announcing a date. We don't want to announce a date and then have to walk it back in any way, shape, or form. It is absolutely going to come out before the end of the year. At the time we were talking about this, it's only 4 months left, so there's not going to be very long to wait. But we're hoping to announce a final day and date soon. Everybody is very eager.
What makes a pixel kind of take on a video game from the 80s or 90s work in 2024?
It's interesting because the facade, like a pixel look, a retro look and all that stuff, that's one way to get people into the game. But the reality is you have to make something that plays in a modern way. People who remember old games fondly, they're remembering the experience they had more than the game itself in most cases. So I often tell people, don't go back and play the game. If you really love it, don't go back and play it, because there's been decades now of game design iteration that is going to get in the way of your enjoyment of some of those older games. So we always want to approach it with let's deliver the facade, the feel of what you remember, not necessarily the exact experience that the game was back in the day. So if we're going to do something like a brawler, let's add to that. Let's make it more modern. Let's make it feel more modern. If we're going to do a driving game, let's not go back to those old driving games. We got to modernize these things.
You guys have done some recent collections as well. I'm thinking of the Disney game collection, where you also go in and you tune the games as well and you update them. That must be a kind of a give back to those memories in a way too, right?
Absolutely. When we celebrate all of these older games, we make sure that they're there and they're perfect, they're pixel perfect, and everything that you would want from the game, but we'll often put an extra layer on top. If you look at something like what we did with Aladdin and Lion King, we even brought back one of the original designers to help clean up and take down the rough edges a little bit and help us deliver the ultimate version of Aladdin. There was some stuff that was left on the cutting room floor that the team wanted to add in. We have one of the team members that works for us, Nick Broody, here, and so we had a lot of really great insight into what it was supposed to be, but there was a time restraint. And so we're able to put that stuff back into the game, so that was really amazing. And then if you look at something like the Blizzard Arcade Collection, we're able to ultimately realize the Rock and Roll Racing. We took all the versions of Rock and Roll Racing, put them all together, put in extra language support, refined some of the gameplay, made a 4-player version of the game that everybody always wanted, and make sure that you can have that at least in the game. So we like to take the original games, present them their best possible possible way, and then also give fans something new to look forward to. So in the case of like Rock 'n' Roll Racing, they had the best track. They had all the tracks from Genesis and Super Nintendo in one game with a 4-player mode and all that sort of thing.
What can current modern game developers, people that are maybe just starting out their career, haven't been doing this for very long, learn from playing some of these classic games?
It's funny, I find myself saying this a lot now because I'm an old fart in the game industry, but there's almost no new ideas. You'll get somebody saying like, I've got this idea where you dig into the ground, you do tunnels and stuff, and you're like, dig dug, or whatever. It's like, I'm going to do this one thing here, and it's like, oh, that was Choplifter or whatever. But there's so much to learn from those games because what worked and what didn't work, just like in any other medium, if you think of like film or television, there's this rich history of failures and successes that like you should look at because you'll save yourself so much time. Don't go down failed paths. Do your research. It's funny that you have to say this in a game context, but when you're doing anything else, you do a lot of research before you start spending money and time into something. Games are no different. You need to do that research, and you might not appreciate these older games or any of these other things, but like at least understand them, understand where they came from, understand the impact they had, because as you're developing your game, your idea, there's so many landmines you can avoid by just doing that.
There's a thing about Digital Eclipse, especially if you dig into the catalog, and I have so many of the collections on Game Boy and all the other platforms over the years, but it's always been about preservation. It's always been about respecting the history and acknowledging it. What's changing as you're evolving into this next phase with Atari and the company keeps growing?
The acquisition of Atari really enabled us to focus on our vision. That's what I love about the Atari crew that we're now part of, the family we're part of, is they really believe in our mission, and that's they wouldn't have come to us with this opportunity had they not. We proved it with Atari 50, and they're really encouraging. They encourage us to continue down that path, and we have a lot of crazy ideas that we want to explore. The idea that we could create something that's like the Criterion Collection, but more so because we want to give everybody the tool set to appreciate games in our history, but also the people, the places, the technology. It's funny because like when I was in film school, I kept going to class, they kept talking about how many films have been lost, and they were lost due to a lack of appreciation for their value and that sort of thing. And it just kept sticking in my head that it reverberated over and over and over again through so many classes. And then realizing in like around the late 90s that we were in that same position in the game industry. There's a lack of perceived value in anything that was earlier, and everybody was looking forward so far as they could, that the perceived value of anything previous was just zero. It was nothing. And so part of my passion, part of the reason I was so excited to be part of Digital Eclipse and help grow Digital Eclipse, was that our mission was to make sure that we didn't lose sight of the value of these older games. And how do we do that? Well, we do it one product at a time, and we try to introduce new ways for people to appreciate and understand games from our past.
Can you tease what's next? We know about Tetris Forever. We know about the Power Rangers game. Anything you want to get us thinking about?
We can't really talk about what we have in the works right now, but if you look at the natural progression and where we're going and where we want to take things, you mentioned this earlier, but the opportunities have been coming more our way. As we've proven out how this works and the value of it, we've been lucky to have a lot of people reach out and discuss potential opportunities. We're able to have conversations with people we never could have before about things that we would like to do, and they're meaningful conversations that could turn into really great things, and some of those things you'll see going into next year.
So there you go. There was a little EP visit with the fine folks at Digital Eclipse. Thank you so much to Mike Mika and the rest of the team for having EP in there. It was really cool to catch up with all of them. Thank you so much for watching. If you dug this video, make sure to hit that little thumbs up button and subscribe if you're not already. Thanks for your support. We'll see you soon. And until then, play forever.